There's nothing worse than when you're drawing to get to the point where you need to draw the feet and connect the figure to the ground, only to find that the perspective is off, or it's just tricky to actually draw the character's feet and make them feel as if they're grounded. In this video, I want to do a simple drawing lesson where we talk about how to solve this and how to think about drawing characters that feel grounded and solid. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name's Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, you can check out my free Quick Start Guide. It's there to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, in the line and color style. I go over all of my thoughts about how to create an illustration from the thumbnail to the finish, and you get all the PSDs and brushes that I tend to use all day, every day. It's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out. So this is a major point of frustration, I think, for a lot of us when you're learning anatomy and you're trying to learn the figure. And it's one thing to play around with, gesture sketches and trying to get sort of flow and sort of emotion and energy into your figures. I think that's also something that we often struggle with early on, trying to get that sort of energy in there. But I think more important is getting the sort of static energy sorted, understanding how people sit, how people are just kind of often hanging around. I found these techniques are actually the ones that we tend to use more often in art, especially in character design or comics, where you have to either draw a lot of characters kind of standing on the ground, and having a certain amount of emotion, having a certain amount of sort of posture that communicates who they are. In comics, it's almost the opposite thing. You just have to draw a lot of characters. You often have to draw them, next to each other in crowd scenes, and you need to make sure all those feet are sitting on the same ground plane and that it feels like they're sort of grounded and solid. This is actually something we can really, really easily solve using a few simple perspective and form drawing tricks, and that's what I want to share with you in this video. Something else I want to do is talk about how this concept relates to actual drawing in the wild. So we'll look at some comics and concept art, check out some manga like One Piece. Got some Naruto here. I've got, again, the Pinocchio book that I drew, and also some cool, sort of concept art. We'll use this as a great example. Breath of Fire complete works. Again, and just sort of look at how important this concept is, and sort of just illustrate how many times and in what situations you're likely to have to make sure that your characters are grounded in this way. We'll do that on the drawing table in a little bit. So if we look at our kind of écorché anatomical model, you can see that a lot of what we're trying to do is, again, connect the basic structure of the figure to the ground, and then be able to control the sort of sense of balance that goes along with that. But again, in this video, I want to focus entirely on how we just draw the feet and how we connect the figure to the ground. I'll make subsequent videos that will cover more about how to modify the entire figure once we do shift the balance. Because again, once you shift the balance too much, then you start to sort of modify the twist of the hips and all those things. A lot of this is about avoiding your characters looking awkward. There's nothing worse than drawing some big badass dude who's meant to be some sort of awesome space pirate or something like that, and then they're kind of just sort of sitting there like amateur, right? You want to be able to imbue the characters with the right sort of emotion. And I think that this is where it all starts. It's just starting with making them grounded. But again, this builds upon and is the foundation that you can use to think about where the feet are actually placed and how the character is sort of, affected by how they place their feet and carry their weight. But we'll do more on that in another video. In this one, I want to focus on the most basic thing, which I think is actually the most important. How do we get the character to be grounded in just a simple static pose? Anyway, let's jump over to the drawing table and look at how to do this. Okay, here we are at the drawing table, and I've got a few notes to get us started. But before I do that, I'll just go over quickly the tools I'm going to use in case you might be wondering. I'm drawing with a matte Blackwing, and this is a Strathmore 400 series sketch pad. It is wire bound, and again, it's a pretty good sort of sketch paper, but not good for drawing or doing detailed work on. So this is what I'm going to be using. Now, I've got the skeleton, because I think the skeleton here in this sort of model actually gives us a really good indication of what is sort of happening to get the figure to connect to the ground. So there's kind of two parts to this, right? First is kind of how do we handle the perspective of the feet connecting to the ground. The second part is kind of how do we make sure that we space the feet relative to the center of balance so that it feels like the character is grounded, but also grounded and sort of balanced in relation to gravity. And then I guess we also have the concept of how do we sort of make sure that the figure is positioned sort of centralized and so that they're going to be sitting, you know, relatively equal over their center of balance, and that again, it's going to feel like the character is sitting there in a comfortable position. So to go over the basic concepts here, the first thing we need to think about is what is the fundamental perspective version of a foot. And really we have a couple of major components. We have the heel, which is essentially where a lot of the sort of vertical alignment of the leg is going to connect to the ground. The second major point that we have is what we consider to be the ball of the foot, which is kind of where the front of the foot connects to the ground. We often have sort of an arch in the foot, and that sort of bit doesn't connect with the ground as much. So we kind of tend to have these two points that we're often trying to track, or at least that's how I found it really important to think about it. The other major sort of concept here is just that, again, the foot kind of has a vector or a line that we can easily use to define, you know, how to connect those two up. So the way I like to think about this is very simply to just consider the leg to be coming down, then we have a heel, and then we have a sort of line that basically just defines the, you know, the major sort of length of the foot, and then we have the ball of the foot, which is kind of, you know, the bit that is sort of just before your toes, right? The mound of stuff, right? This would be like the toes, right? And again, that sort of thing that comes before your big toe, right? So if we look at our sort of non-skeletal mannequin, right? It's kind of like this thing. It's this thing which tends to connect to the ground in a major way. So we got these two things that we're trying to track in perspective. And the easiest way to think about this is just to always make sure that we understand where the ground plane is. So there's a couple of really, really simple basic drawing concepts that will help us here. So we've got the concept of the center line, right, which is this just the center of balance, where you would draw a line directly up the figure, identical to this steel beam, which has been placed in the character to kind of help keep them upright, in the skeleton character here. So we kind of have this running through our body when we're in a static position. Obviously, this changes depending on where your balance is, right? So once we move, then this changes a little bit. But if we start this way, this gives us a great grounding to then go and think about and add movement to the figure. So this is actually, I think, more important to start with than worrying too much about, you know, moving or gesture or anything like that. Start with this and get this under control. Next, we would move on to, again, adjusting the balance and the posture, which will be a separate video, but what we're doing here is just understanding the basic construction. So to do that in the beginning, we have the center line for balance, as I just said, and then we have the concept of the ground plane, i.e. where is the character actually standing? What are they on? And how can we sort of track that? So here we've got a great example again. We've got the sort of skeleton mannequin, and it's it's got this base that it's sitting on, and that really is the same as the ground plane. And what we're trying to do is always position the character somewhat in perspective, similar to a box, right? If we have our perspective box, what that box is sitting on is the ground plane. And there's a number of ways we can visualize this. You don't need to go heavy into perspective in order to get most of the benefits from this. Mostly what you have to start doing is visualizing where that ground plane is. And what we'll do in a second is just sort of talk about how we develop this construction and talk about, again, how best to think about effectively setting up these kind of grids. With all drawing, the trick is that there's many building blocks here. So we have the perspective building block, we have our ability to sort of draw a stick figure mannequin. I have more tutorials on these in the channel if you want to sort of check those out. And then we have, again, all of these concepts of posture, etc., etc. We're building a giant structure, right, that is eventually going to be your sort of artistic skill set. And a lot of this is built on, as we often say, the foundation. And it can be frustrating. I feel the pain if you're sitting there saying, yeah, but all this is hard because just drawing the structure is hard. It's still worthwhile doing these exercises, because what it'll do is teach you that, look, if you can sense that if you could draw a better grid, if you could understand the box logic, if you could get better at perspective, then it would make your figures better. Then that makes this stuff more fun, which is a win. So trying these things all the time, even if your perspective is not great, is, in my opinion, really useful, because, again, it highlights where perspective can immediately help you out. And then if you do a perspective course, or you watch some videos that sort of give you a little bit of a boost in perspective, you know how to relate it to the figure. So anyway, hopefully that gives you a basic outline of sort of where we're going with this. Let's start with the basic construction and talk about how to connect the figure to the ground. Before we dive into the technical drawing aspects of this, let's look at some examples of this concept working in the real world and explain why it's so important to be able to connect your figures to the ground. So this is a Pinocchio book that I drew with, written by the talented David Chevelle. This is the cover, and as you can see, we have essentially just a bunch of characters sitting on, a stage. But it's really, really critical to be able to calculate where all of the characters are in relation to each other. Now, that's obviously a sort of separate drawing challenge in and of itself, but this is where it starts. This is where this entire concept will sort of help you day in, day out. Just understanding and look at the number of times in your artistic life as a professional, you're going to need to just draw characters and understand where they are balanced relative to some kind of central point. So these characters, some of them are posed, which again is a slightly sort of more advanced technique than what we're going to be covering today, but it's really critical to just always be able to effortlessly place characters on a ground plane and have a pretty good feeling for how they are connected to the ground. And it's actually one of the most challenging things to do, because you're dealing with very small tolerances, right? So often you're not going to be able to see, like these massive distances between, the back foot and the front foot. Often the feet are sort of foreshortened. It's actually quite challenging, but I think it is one of the most important things that you can do. And it's just something that you do all day, every day. If you look inside the book, you can see a very similar set of tasks that are often needed. We got little Pinocchio here running around on the ground. And again, he's posed, he sort of has his balance slightly moving. But just this idea of grounding the character is really, really important. it's one of those things that can take a little bit more time than it should if you don't have the basic technical foundational stuff down. But again, pretty much on every page there is some sort of solution that needs this kind of technique. Again, it's often possible to draw a lot of panels or a lot of sort of designs and stuff without drawing the feet. But in general, I think what you'll find is that it's always easier from being an artist day to day if you can just kind of handle these situations, right? Just get that character grounded, understand where they are all the time. It's also something that I think we can consider to be critical no matter what style you have. I think that one of the most important things that you sort of find is that, again, if you're looking at manga or something similar, you're going to have a lot of, really cool action poses. But again, so many situations where you're going to need to draw the characters on the ground, understand where the balance is, and just be able to kind of effortlessly draw people standing there all the time and be able to kind of handle these small, subtle balance shifts. And again, it's just one of these sort of fundamental tasks that we need to handle. Now, if you look at something that's more stylized, again, one of the most sort of, the best examples I like to use is kind of One Piece. I think that, again, it's easy to overlook the degree to which, even though the characters are very, very stylized and exaggerated, there is always a really good sense that they're balanced and grounded. So they might kind of have these rubber spaghetti arms, but where we need to, again, there's a really good sense that all the characters are connected to the ground. And more than that, I think that it is really something that you can feel in the character's personality and demeanor. So if you don't ground these characters well, they don't look cool. They don't feel as if they've got a lot of sort of aggression and, that they are kind of balanced, which is important because, again, a lot of these, characters are meant to be real sort of badass fighting characters, and they are drawn in this kind of really sort of silly, in a really good way style, where they got these kind of, plasticine sort of rubber arms and stuff. But again, notice they're all grounded and that side of the drawing is handled. Another place, as I said, that this is really, really useful is when it comes to character design. So if we look at some of the character designs done for the Breath of Fire game, again, you're going to see a sort of variety of very, very similar concepts that are, really, really need to be sorted. All the characters need to be grounded. We need to be able to sort of, again, change that balance and understand that the character needs to be sort of centered. So again, here you have more of a sort of like macho, grounded sort of character, and again, their feet are placed wide apart. But we can still see that, again, we're gonna find the center of balance to be pretty accurately between those. Again, the character's gonna feel really solid. If we look at, again, a more sort of feminized character, you can see that, again, her legs are often sort of crossed, right? It's a different sense of balance, right? It feels as if she's light, as if she's kind of floating, right? Because, again, she kind of has wings, right? That's kind of the point. Now, again, you'll find that with these, there's not actually a lot of real sort of modification of the basic pose. The character's still standing fairly sort of vertical, fairly sort of upright. Here you've got slight sort of change in the posture, but not really. The main thing here is just understanding how do the feet connect to the ground. And again, if you understand that, then it's a million times easier to start to make these small adjustments. So again, what I want to do in the next section is go over the technical side of how this happens so we can, again, build that first stage that will eventually allow us to play more with character and do the fun stuff. All right, so the first stage that I think is really useful here is just to consider what is the minimum amount of perspective we can use. As with all of these things, as I said, the more of this you know, the easier this will be. But what we're often talking about and thinking about is just the idea, as I said, of a box. And when we've got that box, what we're primarily considering is what is the box sitting on. And that box is often sitting on what we would consider to be a ground plane. Now, that is just the place that we sort of calculate a lot of the other measurements in the drawing with. The way that I often like to shortcut this, because drawing a box around your character is great to demonstrate the concept, and you've seen a lot of other drawing teachers also do this stuff, where we draw a box, we draw a figure within the box, etc. And through doing that, it helps us to understand how the box relates to all of that other stuff, right? And I think that's like a really important lesson, right? To just understand, like, oh, the figure goes in the box. The problem is when you're practicing stuff, you don't want to draw boxes around all your figures. You want to kind of imagine the box, right? That's the whole point of that exercise. What we can do in terms of actually drawing stuff that I find useful is to draw just a line that, again, is very similar to this line that runs up the center of the figure. This is the thing that we're going to sort of call our sort of true vertical line, and we're going to base a lot of the other measurements off that. The other thing that we need is, again, some sense of where that ground plane is. And what I like to do is, again, just sort of indicate the center sort of cross section there. And this really just sets most of the perspective. And we can draw a simple grid around that. Now, this is more of an isometric grid, and the best way to kind of sort of shortcut your ability to understand this type of drawing lesson, if you don't have a really good sense of perspective knowledge, where you can sort of accurately place the horizon line, etc., is just to kind of draw the character as if they're a little bit sort of, we're viewing them with a camera that is a little bit more zoomed out, and we have more of an isometric perspective. And isometric just means that, again, these lines are not really converging anywhere. A non sort of isometric grid might look a little bit more like this, right? So in this case, we're drawing a grid, and all right, so we're going to have a, so that means our horizon line is going to be, somewhere sort of up here, and all right, something is going to be drawn in here. So again, in this case, we've got a rough grid. Rough grid that is non-isometric. i.e., we can easily see there's a lot of convergence, right? And that these vanishing points are going to some sort of consistent horizon line. If you just sort of consider it to be a box where we're drawing that box, and even if there's a lot of convergence, even if there's a lot of us looking up or down at that box, right, it's clear that these lines aren't really converging, right? So they're not really going to a vanishing point. They're just isometric. Right? So basically, the simple version of this is, if you're struggling with perspective, then just don't make huge amounts of sort of convergence with these grids. Just think about it as a way to line up your drawings and to line up these sort of different elements that we're going to use, right? So if I think about having to line up the basic components of the figure here, boom, right, using this kind of grid, this is what I'm using. I'm just using these lines to help me line up, again, the shoulders, the hips, the knees, the legs. So hopefully that makes sense. What we want to start with, though, is, again, a simple construction that involves this center line. All right, so let's make that super obvious, right? Boom, center line. And then what we're after is basically just a good sense of where their ground plane is, right? And a good sense of where that center line is kind of hitting the ground plane. So again, this would be the thing you would start with. Now the sketch I did doesn't quite match the center line here. You can see this foot is a little bit too far on that side, this bit is a little bit too far on that side, and that is a good reason why these structures will actually help us. Because again, if I now place and space those feet in a sort of more accurate way relative to the center line, i.e. here we've got our center line, and what I want is those feet to be placed equally on either side of the center line. For this particular exercise, again, people stand in all sorts of ways, but to begin with, let's focus on grounded. So this is the fundamental concept that we're dealing with. And I would recommend always drawing some sort of smaller characters so that, again, it's a little bit easier to manage the proportions, right? So I think if you're just sort of trying to do this, it's better to iterate with smaller characters because this allows you to sort of see what's happening a little bit easier. And yeah, you're less likely to kind of deal with other drawing problems that come with drawing things that are larger, but certainly, feel free to draw at whatever size you want. Okay, so hopefully that clears a few questions that you might have about, can I do this, blah, 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 etc., etc. What do we actually do? Well, the thing that I'm starting with is, again, the center line plus the cross. And this really is all of the construction that we need. What I'm going to do is take that center line, and I've got the bottom of the character, and I'm just going to roughly measure halfway up that line. Again, if there was a lot of convergence, i.e. we're looking at the character directly from above, right? If we had maybe a construction a little bit more like this, then what we might want to do is obviously take into consideration the perspective that's happening there. So again, these are all sort of little traps that you can sort of fall into if you're sort of adding too much perspective or not enough perspective there. But in the beginning, I think halfway up is a really sort of good place to start, especially if you don't have a really sort of exaggerated perspective grid. But just understand that this idea will work for sort of any angle or any perspective. It's just a matter of sort of visualizing, again, where that box is around the character. So what we can see here is I'm actually, I'm actually thinking about the box, but I'm not drawing a box because a box gets in the way. But what I can start with is this element of the box, right? So I'm thinking about if we had a box and then it has a giant big line down the middle of it. So this is where we start. We divide it in half. Why is it important to do this? Because again, this isn't 100% related to grounding the character, but it will sort of help you to understand how useful this is, because as soon as you think about drawing figures within little set proportions, it means that the second task, and one of the main reasons you would use this, which is to draw multiple characters sitting on the same ground plane, that becomes a lot easier. A big part of this is just visualizing these proportions and visualizing that ground plane. But this is the fundamental thing that we start with. We've got our line up, and then we have a cross underneath it. And this actually sets a huge amount of the perspective. So if we want to make this a little bit simpler, a little bit more technical, again, what I'll do is I'll sort of use a ruler. And the next thing is to divide up this proportion. And this is going to give us, roughly, we're going to have a torso here. We're going to have some hips here. Bump, bump. we're going to have a head up here. Going to have some shoulders here that are going to come down. Now, a really sort of other useful sort of series of lines that you can make is just a series of lines that drop down along the side of the character. So we can imagine here's the character. All right, we can visualize that the side of that rib cage and sort of the side of the hip bone. Yeah, normally, you know, in the vast majority of people, I think there's going to be a pretty clear line that is going to sort of line up there. So you can actually start much of this construction by just sort of drawing down parallel to your center line. And what that does is it sort of gives us the feeling of, you know, where that line would hit on the ground plane here. Boom. And so that's giving us a really good sense of center. All right, so here we've got, and we've got these sort of equal points that are dropped down. Now again, at the bottom of that rib cage, I'm going to put the first arm, second arm, right, and at the bottom of that pelvis, I'm going to put the start of a hand, and we've got a hand here. Now, the next thing, again, that's often sort of tricky is the thing that we want to talk about and deal with here, which is how do we connect this to the ground? And that's where what you need to pay attention to is how far apart from each other are the feet. In this case, again, you can see like a very sort of standard pose is that the feet are going to be a little bit in, or at least, you know, in line with the shoulder. You know, if you don't do a lot of sort of, you know, physical sort of sports or, you know, anywhere thing where people are trying to get you to like, you know, get into a normal sort of ready position, you know, they often say feet shoulder width apart. That means you're going to be just nicely balanced, right? Again, you know, easy to be balanced with feet shoulder width apart, and that is here a really, really great place to begin. And what we're going to do is just draw probably, yeah, maybe like you could actually use that sort of sideline here. But again, I'm just going to pick, right, zoom up on that. It's going to pick a point above those hips. So we got 1 foot there, 1 foot there. And to begin with, the easiest way to think about this is just to say, here I've got the leg coming down. Here I've got the ball of the foot. That's what's happening. Sorry, the heel. Right, and then we've got, and here we've got the ball of the foot. And that really is the construction we need. So here I've got boom, upper leg, all right, lower leg, and that's coming down. Bang, I've got the heel, and now what I need to draw is the foot. Now, to begin with, what we're going to do is just draw it sort of coming straight. So we'll draw it parallel to these sort of center lines here. All right, so the foot is just coming out there, right, on both sides. Again, this is pretty rough because I'm drawing it sort of quite small. So, again, another reason why, you know, you'll find drawing it small is a little bit more forgiving. If you get these a little bit off, it's not quite so much an issue. We'll do some bigger ones to kind of make sure we can get it more accurate. But the next thing we're essentially doing is kind of saying, well, if the foot was a really long foot, right, it would sort of be coming out here, right, almost like if the person was on skis, right, that's what it would look like. But that's not really, obviously, what's happening. We'll take a little bit of this back, right? Often what's happening is the feet are kind of ending a lot shorter than that. And that really is the construction that we've got. So it's thinking about all of these structures together that will really help us. But the grounding element sort of happens here, and there's a lot of sort of tricks you can use to play around with that and obviously place the feet wider apart or again sort of closer apart, and that will drastically change the feeling of the pose, you know, even with this kind of quite static sort of again abstract drawing exercise that we're doing here. But let's look at a few other things we can do here to zoom in on this and again, we'll take that into the next page and look at kind of how we can add some sort of extra structure here and how we can sort of help measure these things. Because in the beginning, what you'll find is that probably what you're wanting to do is sort of do this loosely and guess well. Your ability to guess well and just be able to kind of draw this without drawing in all these sort of measuring lines is often based in your practice of drawing in all the lines and, you know, even maybe, you know, doing it with a ruler. So let's go to the next step and we'll look at a few other tips and do some repetitions on this so we can really dial in this concept. Okay, so let's use a little bit more of a technical drawing style when we're dealing with this. In this case, I'm going to think a little bit more about the perspective side of it. But if you don't want to follow along with this, then again, just think about it as being, yeah, more or less, you know, an isometric perspective exercise. So this is still very rough. This is not technical perspective in any way, shape, or form. I'm not calculating that these vanishing points are actually going anywhere. There's no cone of vision. There's none of the actual technical perspective that you would need to use to really understand what's happening here. Most perspective things that just talk about 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective are sort of, I would say, drastically anemic and insufficient to actually teach you what perspective is about. You probably need to go a little bit deeper than you think, but it's also a lot easier than you think to go deeper. And once you do, you kind of never really need to do it again, right? You kind of get that stuff sorted. So again, here, we're going to deal with that same concept about halfway up. I'm going to use my simple proportional markers. If you want to learn more about what I'm doing here and building this structure, then you can check out some of the other videos on the channel. I'll have some links in the description, and they talk specifically about, you know, the Loomis method and how it sort of relates to comic books and, you know, manga and, you know, other stylized art. But for now, this is what again, this is how I would sort of handle this construction. And really, this idea of getting things grounded is something you would study once you're a little bit more comfortable drawing the figure to begin with. So again, what I've got is some other lines that I'm putting in now, and I would recommend as an exercise, but obviously I'm not doing this stuff when I'm just drawing characters, right? I'm guessing a lot of these things, but for now, I think that again, it can really help you to just be analytical about it, right? So again, I've got my center line. Right? This that I often visualize, and I often do just visualize it with a circle because that helps me, right? This is my ground plane, right? That's my sort of connection point with the ground plane, and this is going to be very close to my heel, but maybe not exactly close. So here, again, I'm going to put some shoulder markers there, and it's going to be a head somewhere here. All right, again, it's not about the head and all that other stuff, but it's about what's going on here. So let's look at a few ways we can just think about this in more detail. So as I said, the first thing you could do is just think about, hey, it's like they're wearing skis. And it's like they're wearing skis and they're straight. And in this case, what I'm going to do is, not worry too much about, convergence, like is it going in or out. I'm just going to draw these other lines parallel, i.e., in line with the center line. And in that case, again, what we do is just say, well, here's my heel. All right, let's sort of draw in, again, slightly bowed, exaggerated, springy leg there. Again, same one here. All right, trying to make them kind of feel as if they line up. Boom. And in this case, again, I am just literally drawing them, in line with the side of that rib cage. Because again, I find that does work. Let's make this rib cage a little bit bigger. Again, add a bit of form to kind of help us understand what's going on. And again, let's just draw boring hands at our sides, because again, I always want to add, some interesting sort of pose to these characters, but again, it often takes us off track. We'll do one of those at the end, just as a demonstration of how we can sort of add muscle to this, and it really sort of helps us with that grounding. But again, this technical exercise is what I'd consider an abstract drawing exercise, i.e. this has nothing to do with how I would draw or how I'd recommend you drawing. I'm not advocating, as I said, drawing with rulers and playing around, but being accurate like this and thinking about it in a more technical way trains the precision that will improve your ability to guesstimate and just kind of sketch around. Again, like all those examples we looked at earlier from manga, from comics, from concept art, where the artist is not doing this. But this will help you, if you do a little bit of this, it'll help you to improve the accuracy and clarity of your normal everyday sketching, where you're going crazy and, again, trying to think about these things as you draw quickly. Anyway, here we are. We got our skis. Now, the first thing you could do is just say, again, the feet are just running along the line of the ski. And if we look at that from above, which again, if we got my little sort of skeleton character, right, that's essentially what I'm trying to think about is if we look at this from above and we, can't see that. Sorry. And we think about there's a line going that way and a line going that way, but there's also some other secret hidden lines. There is a line that sort of crosses the foot, right, at the sort of extremity of where the foot connects to the ground. And there's also other lines that are really sort of talking about where the vector or direction of that foot is going to lead. So let's look at character on skis, right? Character on skis has its frame like this. We've got, so again, I'm just sort of drawing a frame to kind of think about the grid. But let's draw that center line, boom, which again is this guy. Drawing in that one. And now I'm going to draw in this line, which kind of hooks up where the legs are positioned. So this is the center, right? We can think about this literally as being center. And, right, I've got a line coming out here and a line crossing that way. At either side of that, I have a heel. And this is what skis would look like. Right, boom, boom, boom. And then, right, we just draw the foot. And again, there are hidden lines there which I could use to say, well, that's where the foot goes here, and that's where the foot goes there. And it's often that construction there, which is, it's so simple, right? It is literally like a box. All I'm doing there is just literally sort of drawing a box like this. It is just these sides of a box. And if you just do this and think about it this way, it will help. This is what I call the box logic, right? And this is why people keep on saying, right, again and again, study your boxes, right? Because it helps. Because again, this is the basic structure that we're using. Now, with all drawing, what we do is just layer these really, really simple concepts on top of each other again and again and again. And if you understand this, then you should be pretty comfortable with this. But there's another really good drawing sort of technical thing we can use here to help us. And that is where what we might do is, let's draw the same thing. Boom. 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 Right. Got my horizontal, right, which is this one. Now I've got the center, boom, which is going down here. Boom. Oh, that's not very centered. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter that much, but let's try and make it a bit more centered so that I can pretend I'm a professional drawing teacher. Which again just goes to show how how rulers don't always save you, right? If you're not in the practice of like properly lining it up, it can be tricky. So here I've got my center. And again, what I've got is heels either side. Heel, heel. Now, if they're on skis, again, this is what I've got. But again, as you see, often people aren't on skis. Often people are sitting with their feet going in or out. So let's look at, again, simple construction that you could use to do this. And that would be to think about the basic, let's do this smaller because we will need it to be smaller. Actually, let's do it a lot smaller because we might need it to be a lot smaller. Boom. Boom. Right, we got center. Oh, heel, heel. So what you often have is, again, the foot going out a little bit like that. But we can use very, very simple, technical geometry to help us translate that across, right? So again, if I sort of draw this as a triangle, you can see that it's very easy for me to calculate the angle of one foot by drawing back to that center line in that way. Now, you could either, make sure that you draw it, right, and we could use that here, or you can just kind of guesstimate, right? And guesstimation here is probably going to be fine, because you obviously don't want to kind of have to draw it back here. You don't want to have limited space, which is going to force you to kind of have weird feet that are fully sort of out. But just thinking about this concept and saying, hey, let's put the feet out there like that, right? And let's, carry that across. It's pretty easy in this way to kind of, just say, well, it's running through here and it looks like it's the same distance from there to there, right? Same distance from there to there, as that is from there to there. So, that'll probably give us a pretty good indication of something that's similar, right? And again, what's happening there, if we look at, again, the same box logic, is that we have the same thing happening up here. Well, we've got a center line here, center line there, right? And what's happening is, instead of it being like a box, it's like a weird shape that's a little bit different, right? So again, it's gonna stop there. Don't. Right? And it's almost like we've got something like this. Boom. So this is our side of the box. And again, if you were to look at the top of the box, it's going to look a little bit more like this. Again, this is why that, and hopefully, again, a big part of me, again, doing these things is to kind of get you a little bit more excited and pumped about perspective, which is one of the most boring things you can, try and do as an artist. But honestly, it makes so much of this stuff way easier, even if you just understand the most basic concepts of it in a really simple way. And again, it's often tricky to kind of understand, well, how is this going to help you? Again, this is why, this is how. Just understanding these very, very simple perspective hacks. Again, not all this stuff is 100% lining up, doing it with a big chunky pencil, but hopefully you get the idea. So again, that's really what we're doing. So how do we do that on the figure? Well, normally with a lot of perspective, what we're actually trying to do is sort of translate one thing that we've drawn freehand to another position accurately. So the way that I would do this is let's just draw one of these legs at an angle that kind of feels sort of natural, right? And that could be any you want, right? Let's it could be like this, right? Could be like this, could be whatever you want. Now, if we sort of take that one, again, all I'm going to do is draw that back to there. Let's sharpen this pencil or I'm going to run into major trouble. With all perspective work, the thing to remember is that you're only as good as the width of your pencil, right? So if your pencil is is really sort of chunky, then you're just going to constantly be making errors that are potentially the width of your pencil, and those will just kind of keep piling up. So here again, I'm just going to draw this one roughly parallel here, not much convergence, right? But boom, boom, heel, right? That's going to give me a pretty good indication of where those are. And again, what we need to do is think about how to construct feet on top of that, which is probably a different video lesson, to be honest, and I don't want to kind of make this too much longer, or again sort of start to compound those concepts and make things more complicated for you, because this is a really simple drawing exercise that hopefully you can get behind. But this really is the core of it. We use these basic sets of geometry to kind of understand the vector, the direction of the feet, the position of them, and all we are doing is using that simple box logic, right? Got this, boom, here, heel, there's the end of the foot, and then we've got, this is where the heel is kind of attacking the ground. That's where the ball of the foot is hitting the ground. And then just think about it as if you're drawing, like one of those soles. You can often like take the, the bit out of your shoe, the actual sort of sole. Take that out and just kind of lay it on the ground. That's a really good sort of simple way to view it, right? So if we look at that from a cartoony perspective, we've got heel here, right? And just literally view it like this. Okay, this is not anatomy 101. This is not even the most basic anatomy. This is literally a circle, another circle, and then we join them up, right? This is kind of like year 2 drawing, right? But if you just do that and then you place that on the ground as I have, you'll immediately start to kind of be able to visualize where the foot is. Now, obviously drawing a really good foot on top of that is its own challenge, but this is the building block that you can use to construct everything else. So hopefully that makes sense, right? Hopefully that makes sense what we're doing here. Again, we're dealing with where that heel is, right? Where the end of the foot is. How big is the foot? Is it a dainty foot? Is it a chunky foot? Is it the Hulk's foot? That is totally up to you. And that stuff honestly is, the next level of this, where you really start to put it into practice. And that's what I'd recommend you do, is actually try and do this as an abstract exercise a little bit, and have fun with this, but get out the ruler, try be accurate, try do some of these box studies, see how far you go with it. But then try and apply it to your own drawing something cool, something fun, something exciting, which is what I'm going to do right now. Right, so we'll still stick with a pretty simple pose. And again, it can be really useful to just put in a ruler line like that if you're not comfortable drawing your grid. I have a whole video on the Drawing Codex channel just talking about how to draw grids, draw straight lines, draw them freehand. But again, this is normally what I'll be doing. I can, I'm often just sort of eyeballing a lot of this, a lot of the structure, just playing around with it, being loose. All right, got that leg there. And I'm just keeping, keeping that sort of vaguely half and half. Boom. Again, drawing that down. Boom. But in this case, what I'll try is we'll place them a little bit further apart. Again, just for effect and to show you, how you can sort of do that. What I would say is don't worry too much about being hyper accurate with all of this. There's significant fudge factors, right? The significant areas where, it's not really going to matter. You can easily guesstimate an eyeball, right? How, like exactly how far these are. You just don't want to kind of put 1 foot here and 1 foot here, which is often what happens, right? These things often happen where we're actually like way off, right? Again, people are going to shift their balance a little bit. That's totally fine. Just the goal here is to make sure we have control, and to make sure if you really get stuck, you can jump in with a ruler and do it with razor sharp precision. It's always good to have that to fall back on. Now, one of the things to think about that's sort of good if you are putting these a little bit further out, right, is to start with, again, a sort of straight line going from there to there, and that'll help you, again, sort of play with that general sort of arc. And in this one, again, I want, let's just do it. Let's just eyeball it, right? Boom. Right. Those are looking a little bit, maybe, again, a little bit sort of big from a foot perspective. Got some shoulders here. And there you go. Right, so again, you know, you can do as much or as little sort of structure as you want. Again, sort of roughly bottom of the rib cage. Let's again, you know, you can play with this. Put the arm up here. Right, boom, boom. Let's put this arm out a little bit. Let's give this guy a sword or a staff or something. And yeah, there you go. So now we've got like a, you know, a pretty good sort of, you know, block in or sort of rough. Again, using concepts very similar to what you'd find in a, you know, how to draw book like the Loomis Method. But here we've got our sort of grounded character. And the next step, again, is just to draw, you know, let's just draw some, you know, stuff around there, right? Let's add in our features. We'll just do this as a first pass sketch. Right, have a nose there. Eyes there, mouth there. Maybe some elf ears, because that's the kind of thing that, again, I like doing. Boom. Right, we've got center. Maybe some cool armor or something. Shoulder pad. Shoulder pad. Maybe a gauntlet or something. So again, still doing, like, you know, first pass sketching. Got a belt. Okay, let's think about, so that's the bottom of the pelvis. We've got a high thing here. Let's put a strap on, draw through, draw around, switch pencil so that I'm not gonna get too messy. Again, let's draw through. So I sort of, you know, need to go back, maybe reiterate some of those proportions a little bit. Go through, but you can see that, you know, I can feel this. I can feel the groundedness of the character with this sketch, right? I know that the bones are there. I know that, you know, it's gonna be okay, right? I can add, you know, stuff on top of this. All right, maybe like add a sword. Something like that behind. And what do we got here? Let's have some boots, right? Draw the top of the boots. Let's draw some pants. Draw that weird fantasy loincloth thing that doesn't make any sense but looks cool. Let's make a little sort of cape poncho thing. Boom. And again, now we can sort of finish off those feet, make sure that they're sort of looking interesting. So let's get that ball of the foot there. We'll construct it. Again, this one feels like boom. In. Let's sharpen this pencil quickly because that's getting super fuzzy. But again, can be good to make it fuzzy in the beginning. Again, there's a lot of other stuff that will come into play here in terms of how big are feet. One of those things that we can all sort of look at in terms of proportion is that your foot is often the same length as your forearm, right? So from there to there is often the length of your foot as a general rule, which often surprises people, but again, that's just one of those things, right? So again, here we've got, so again, that's coming there. I think I'll move this guy over there a little bit. Make this, because again, this needs to, I think this sort of skirt thing needs to be a little bit wider to take up that. Again, that's where the hip is going to be. Hand like that, boom. And again here, see if we can sketch in a bit of a leg, bit of a boot. So again, here we got center, we got this one, got that one. I feel like that leg might be a little bit over there. So again, the more accurate you are with this, the more you're going to have to not worry about redoing stuff or messing around with things. That is the basic idea there. So we've got this facing that way, that facing that way. And again, we can put in some super simple little face there. Some kind of elfish style character, etc., etc. And again, we can, I'd probably do another pass on this, right? Just making sure, like, yeah, does that look right? Again, the trick is always when we're doing these sort of drawing lessons is that often, the perspective can be sort of tricky to calculate because I'm not always looking at it from the right sort of angle. So yeah, I often like to have like another sort of pass on these to just sort of make sure that the head and the everything else is the right size, because that can often get a little bit sort of lost in translation. So yeah, make that head a little bit bigger, but that gives you the basic idea for what you want to sort of play around with and how we can sort of use that to add some again, sense of sort of groundedness, right? So here we've got ground plane, right? Boom, boom. Right, here's the bit at the edge. That's what we've got there. Got this other heel kind of here, going out that way. And yeah, I feel like that could be better positioned a little bit maybe. Now, the thing with these techniques is that, again, you have the troubleshooting there. So, even if you sort of get through it and you're like, oh, it's not quite right, you know what I mean? It's not quite sort of perfect or whatever. You have the ability to go back because it's based on something. So here I'm like, oh yeah, that foot, isn't quite, right. And normally it would probably be something, if it's just a sketch, I don't worry. But because it's a demo talking about trying to make sure that the feet are kind of grounded, right? And your character's grounded. I'm a little bit more fussy, but because I've got this structure underneath everything, because I've got the sort of the basis there, I can go back and say, well, what is wrong with that, right? Like, how can I modify that foot, right? Does it need to go more this way? Does it need to go more that way, right? Is it about where things are sort of positioned? What is going on, right? Like, what is there? What can I use to kind of help me troubleshoot those problems? The thing where this will normally go wrong is if you just keep kind of going crazy and redrawing and redrawing and redrawing and redrawing. And yeah, what happens is that, you just kind of find that things sort of tend to drift. And as they sort of drift and move around, then yeah, that's when you get into trouble, right? That's when what happens is, you move the foot around, you sort of keep redrawing it, and then it kind of never really, it never really comes together. It never really kind of looks good. So again, focus on that. Focus on making sure that you pay attention to these things, do some of this sort of technical drawing, and also then again, practice this, and then, just bounce back and forward. As I always say, the more of you do of this, the easier your life will be, because it's all about drawing fun stuff. And the more you do this, the more you'll actually be able to apply these concepts to your actual work. That is the kind of stuff you actually want to do. So hopefully this has been useful and interesting. Just remember those basic concepts. Center line, right? Where is the center line of the character? Again, does that line up with the sense of balance? We need to understand and get good at visualizing the ground plane, right? Ground plane, right? Right, and again, we've got the heel, the ball of the foot, and these different sort of cross sections, right? So again, just keep remembering all of those things. Keep it simple. Just go with the skis version, right, to begin with. And then start to play with the wider stance, closer stance. The next step to this is to think about, as we place our sort of feet, and move our balance from side to side, what happens is, again, that the hips will twist, the shoulders will twist. A lot of things will kind of change to, accommodate that basic shifting. So again, the next thing we can do, and what I'll do in a subsequent video, is talk about exactly that. What happens when, again, you've got a situation where the character is more like this, right? So you've got bump, bump, head down, right? But again, if center line is here, what you might have is someone basically standing on the center line, and then this foot or this leg is going to be way out there. And again, they might be doing that for, whatever reason. So this basic concept is the first step that you can use to really get sort of detailed about different postures and different sort of ways that you might balance the figure. But as I said, and as I keep saying, this is the one to start with. Hopefully this has been interesting. Let me know if you've got any comments or questions down below. And other than that, we'll see you in the next one. Catch you around. Happy drawing.